Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the inaugural event in the Western Library's lecture series. My name is Jeffrey Little, and I'm the Vice Provost and Chief Librarian here at Western. I want to begin by acknowledging that Western University is located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Nunapewak, and Chinongtung nations, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. This land continues to be home to a diverse Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. The Western Library's lecture series was established this year and is an extension of our role as the academic commons of the university. Libraries, as you know, are spaces for engagement, discovery, contemplation, and questioning. This series will be a public forum for conversation and the exchange of ideas, and will bring one or two scholars, artists, or researchers to Western libraries each year. I'm very happy that the Macintosh Gallery and the Department of Visual Arts are co-sponsoring this year's event, and I thank them for their support. I also want to thank the Western Library staff who helped make this event possible: Meg Perrin-Peniyagam, Dee Kielholtz, Kathleen Wilson, and Puran Thapamagar, as well as our colleagues from Alumni Relations. Before I introduce Ken, I want to gesture to the screen above me and beside me. As you know, Western University, recently kicked off its All In campaign with the goal of raising $1 billion to support research, teaching, learning, and community engagement on this campus and beyond. Western Libraries is critical infrastructure. We are the heart, the brains, the pipes, the wires, and the scaffolding that facilitates the creation and dissemination of new research, and we help ensure student success and achievement. I think a group like this understands better than most the role that libraries play in the lives of their users. So I invite you to spend some time on the All In site if you have not already. And if what we do is aligned with your values, then I would ask you to think about Western Libraries in your giving priorities, especially as we move towards the end of the calendar year. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ken Lum, a Canadian artist with an international career and reach. Born in Vancouver since 2011, Ken has been the Marilyn Jordan Taylor Presidential Professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Stuart Wiseman School of Design. His teaching career has also included appointments at UBC, Bard College, École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts, Académie de Bildenden Kunst, the California College of the Arts, and the China Art Academy. Ken's practice explores themes of identity, representation, power, class, and belonging, and spans staged photographic images, text-based signage, monuments, and civic sculptures that reflect demographic and cultural diversity. His work is held in collections worldwide, and he has realized public art commissions in Toronto, Burnaby, Vienna, Rotterdam, St. Louis, and Leiden, amongst other cities. In 2012, with Paul Farber, he co-founded Monument Lab, a national, or rather a nonprofit, public art, history, and design studio based in Philadelphia. Ken's work has been featured in major international exhibitions, including the Sao Paulo, Whitney, Istanbul, Liverpool, and Guangzhou Biennials, as well as in Documenta 11. In 2022 and 2023, in connection with the Gershon Itzkowitz Prize, Ken had a solo exhibition titled Death and Furniture at the Art Gallery of Ontario. In addition to his career as an artist, Ken is the founding editor of Yishu, Journal of Contemporary Chinese Art. A collection of his texts, Everything is Relevant, Writings on Art and Life, 1991 to 2018, was published by Concordia University Press in 2020. His curatorial achievements, including serving as project manager for Okwi and Wazor's monumental 2001 exhibition, The Short Century, Independence and Liberation Movements in Africa, 1945 to 1994. Ken also curated Shanghai Modern, 1919 to 1945, at Munich's Museum Villa Stuck, and the 7th Sharjah Biennial, both in 2005. Ken's contributions to art, culture, and research have been recognized with numerous honors, including the Order of Canada, the Governor General's Award in Visual Arts, the Gershon Itzkowitz Prize, the Scotiabank Photography Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a Killam Award for outstanding research. This afternoon, and fitting for someone who is a careful reader, a compelling writer, and a prescient artist, Ken will speak to us on reading and creative practice. Colleagues, I ask you please to join with me in welcoming Ken Lum to Western Libraries.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. It's great to see Jeffrey again. And it goes without saying that Jeffrey was the brains behind the Canadian writing series book that he mentioned, and gave me a great opportunity, which I'm grateful to him for, publishing my writings. Probably not a good form, but I'm going to do it anyways, since it's an occasion for me to give my 2 cents in terms of why did you change the name from University of Western Ontario? I know you guys I know it's probably all debated. I mean, Western sounds very civilizational to me, so I don't know. And the other 2 cents is I really don't like co-ed bathrooms because not because I'm old school, but because I think men are so messy, and I feel sorry for women, to be honest. So now that I've said that, okay. So Jeffrey proposed to me the topic of reading and how does reading, as opposed to writing, it's much more common for people to propose, writing and art, and because artists sometimes write manifesto statements and treatises and so on. But reading was a kind of a different take, right? And so, and I've never actually given it much thought. I read, but I've never given it much thought, the connection between reading and the creative enterprise. So it's not a talk about my work, but I'm going to be showing you, because out of fear of there's no images, you may be bored to death. I'm going to show you some work. And the way I actually curated the images is that I realized a very large component of my work is about death. It's being motivated by death, the meditation on death. And so, not that I yearn for death, I'm not saying that, but it is that. It's just something that I always think about in terms of life and death and so on. So I'm going to start my essay. Maybe I should start with an image first. Oh, here. Okay. In the mornings, I enjoy making coffee shortly after waking up. I often start my day with a soft-boiled egg, a slice of plain toast, a banana perhaps, and sometimes a warm bowl of oatmeal. After breakfast, I like sitting at the dining room table, turning on my tablet and browsing the New York Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer apps, savoring a peaceful start to the day. Although there's no television in my house, and I haven't owned one since the late 1990s, and I didn't do that on purpose. It was more like there was like generational changes in terms of the technology, and my wife and I just said, "Oh, we should just wait for the better iteration to come in," and then we realized, oh, we didn't miss it, and so it's been like that. So reading is essential, but it means little without the discussions that follow. This belief extends to my teaching. At the University of Pennsylvania, my entire teaching load involves leading graduate seminars. One course is titled Making Space in Public Art. Another covers representations of the Asian body and the story of Chinatowns. This latter seminar examines the history of indentured labor through visual culture and literature. It explores how the concept of public space in Chinatown has changed over time. An important question is how Chinese and other Asian bodies have created public space through their collective bodily presence in areas that are otherwise heavily policed and non-public. A third seminar I occasionally teach is called The Other Paris, a title borrowed from Luc Santé's 2015 book. Santé's work explores the lesser-known history of Paris's marginalized groups, including the poor, bohemians, and criminal communities, especially before Haussmannization. These are works I've done where you could read one. It's about very kind of marginalized lives. They're all invented, but they're highly plausible. I call this series part of the necrology series, these giant frontispiece posters, which I designed. All the language is mine, but they borrow from actual lives. They're composites of obituaries I've read. Similar to the Chinese seminar, I was drawn to the intersections of labor, criminality, pathologized otherness, and the popular press that fueled vivid imaginations of racialized bodies. These courses demand extensive reading and stem from my personal desire to explore these topics more thoroughly. I consume numerous articles, essays, and books before each start of the class, I should say, to the extent that I consider myself almost an expert on these subjects. I say almost because I am resolutely not an academic. It's my curiosity, not my credentials, that drives my learning. Before moving forward, it's important to recognize that everyone has a unique relationship with reading. Mine is, I believe, like many others, sometimes on and off, a love-hate relationship. I'm not an obsessive reader at all, but I do have moments of intense focus when I read. However, I do get excited when I find a book that truly sparks my curiosity and makes me feel like I'm learning something new. When that happens, I will power through a book, and nothing will stop me from finishing it. I often don't read a book straight from start to finish. I tend to jump back and forth randomly, filling in gaps by reading the whole book out of order. Sometimes I'll read part of a book and then forget I never finished it, only to pick it up years later. Some books I return to repeatedly. These tend to be books of poetry, meditation, sayings, or analects. I especially love a book titled Japanese Death Poems, written by Zen monks and haiku poets on the verge of death, which I return to over and over again. I find it inspiring. This is part of work called For French Death in Western Canada. And again, I invented the bios. It is also important not to overestimate the value of reading. Many valuable insights about the world are generated by cultures that do not depend on reading, instead passing down information orally through storytelling across generations. Reading is also related to writing. Reading boosts my confidence to write. Note that I said reading boosts my confidence to write, not that reading makes me more confident as a writer. I don't think of myself as a writer, but I see myself more as an artist who writes. I believe that places me in a somewhat unique category among artists. As a side note, while I don't see myself as a writer in any special way, I often wonder why more artists do not write. When I started in art in the late 1970s, many artists did write, even if often in the form of statements and treatises. I wonder whether this is because artists read less than when I started in art. While I prefer to be called an artist who writes rather than a writer, I really dislike being called a cultural worker, which I am often called whenever I'm in Canada. My mother, who died when I was just beginning to pursue art, was an expert in Chinese opera, especially in the Beijing and Shanghai variants. She had a large vinyl collection of Chinese operas, but was stuck in a grueling sweatshop job until her death. She truly was a cultural worker. Reading is crucial for developing my research habits and increasing productivity during artistic pursuits. I'm not sure what's the next image. Oh, sorry. There you go. Reading is crucial for developing my research habits and increasing productivity during artistic pursuits. Interestingly, reading sometimes takes precedence over creating art, especially when doubts about my abilities as an artist arise. Reading becomes unproductive if it does not connect ideas across different fields of knowledge. A Harlequin romance novella can be just as meaningful as Lacan's Écrits. Like Proust's Madeleine cake in In Search of Lost Time, a book I admit took almost 15 years to finish. Those who have read it would understand that's pretty fast. Sometimes a simple sentence in the most unexpected moments can spark a thought for a piece of art I've long contemplated in making. In other words, there's no strict hierarchy of what needs to trigger my thoughts about my own artistic processes. So while reading is critical, I don't obsess over being a reader. I don't need to act as a reader myself. I read in my own way. I don't need to perform reading. Let me be honest here. I never really gave much thought to the link between reading and art making until Jeffrey Little suggested the idea of a topic for this presentation. But once the topic was planted in my head, I realized how strong that link is between reading and my own artistic creation. I read and make art for overlapping reasons. I aim to gain a deeper understanding of the relationship between truth and power in society. This, she's, in French, we would say she's au troisième âge, meaning she's older. And so she has an ontological moment here of her own sense of being when she's older and later in life. And the question is, it's a Cartesian, je suis, who am I? Que je suis, right? And so on. So that's related to death somehow. But once I realized how strong the link is between reading and my own artistic creation. I read and make art for overlapping reasons. I aim to gain a deeper understanding of the relationship between truth and power in society. I don't read books regularly, but rather irregularly. Some years I read well over 24 books. Other times I barely read any, maybe a book or 2 books. That's not counting magazines and essays and things like that, and chapters. I also start many books I never finish. I often read a few chapters, which I find is enough for my purposes. I frequently revisit a book several months or even years later to complete my reading of it. I have many interests at any given time. I can also be incredibly impatient to learn as much as possible about a subject. Thus, I tend to jump between books, even though I realize it's probably not the best advice for students. But somehow it works for me. For example, I was interested in the history of indentured labor, especially in the second half of the 19th century, during the age of imperialism. At the same time, I had the idea to write a screenplay about Chinese railroad workers. So I would alternate between reading many screenplays of significant or critically important films downloaded from the internet, screenplays by Robert Altman, for example, like McCabe and Mrs. Miller, which is the great Western film, or Anthony Mann films from an earlier period. So I would alternate download from the internet and books about guano mining off the coast of Peru by imported Chinese workers, or the formation of Chinatowns during the California and Idaho gold rushes. A bit more about the screenplays I wrote, as I actually authored 2. Reading can inspire new projects. During the pandemic, I penned a screenplay about Chinese indentured laborers in 1868 Astoria, Oregon, during the Idaho gold rush. Subsequently, I wrote a second screenplay set in 1885, focusing on the Tacoma method, which involved the forcible expulsion of Chinese residents from Tacoma, Washington Territory. I had never written a film script before, but I was driven to do so while teaching a class on representations of the indentured Asian body at the University of Pennsylvania. A student asked me whether there had ever been a feature-length movie about Chinese railway workers. And that encouraged me to write one down, because I realized the answer was no. So I downloaded scripts from filmmakers I admire. Stanley Kubrick, I already mentioned Robert Altman. So despite teaching the subject, I needed to uncover more details on the destruction of Chinatowns and the killings of Chinese workers. The facts are available, but hard to find in detail. This process reminded me of the gap between formal education and the often suppressed or overlooked aspects of history. I must have read several dozen books, ranging from those about building the Transcontinental Railroad to fiction books featuring Fu Manchu and Charlie Chan. As you can see, I tend to binge read as a habit. It's not that I'm naturally inclined or passionate about reading, but I have a strong desire to learn as much as I can about the topic. A psychologist might analyze my relationship with reading, but it is my way to accumulate knowledge. My understanding of what it means to be an artist is fundamental to my identity. This belief motivates me to curate and write, as I see these activities as ways to explore various roles essential to the being in the art world. I often find myself writing out of necessity. To improve my writing, I need to read extensively. I read, write, and curate in a wandering manner. Roland Barthes describes his reading habit as a wandering activity, where reading is a fragmented, associative process rather than a linear, deliberate one. Barthes argued that meaning arises from the reader's personal experiences and cultural backgrounds, resulting in a subjective and varied interpretation process. I agree with this. My method of reading is not a template for anyone else, but just myself. I think this work is in London, actually, at the museum here. One of the ideas I think about most often is Michel Foucault's concept of subject position. It explains how individuals are shaped and defined by power knowledge systems within specific discourses and institutions, rather than being naturally self-determined. People become subjects through categorization, discipline, and exposure to forms of knowledge and social roles that influence their identity, behavior, and understanding of themselves and the world. When I read, I often reflect on my own subject position and sense of being, including the idea that my state of being is constantly in a process of becoming, or that it is impossible to know oneself fully. I also agree with Italo Calvino's idea of rereading texts. I'm referring, some of you probably know, reading the classics, which is an early 1990s book, which is very influential to me. Italo Calvino emphasized that rereading classics, and by the way, it's very important when he says rereading classics, he doesn't mean rereading the canon. He says that you can actually curate your own classics. That's very important. A distinction. Italo Calvino emphasized that rereading classics is essential for adults, as youthful readings can be influenced by impatience and distraction. Rereading later in life allows for a deeper appreciation and discoveries. I often reread texts I read many years earlier. Calvino also pointed out that reading is a personal, transformative act, creating a unique total book through each person's cumulative experiences and letting readers define themselves in relation to the text that they're rereading. I became involved in art during the later stage of conceptual art in the late 1970s. A key element of conceptual art was its connection to language. Words and text often appeared not just to make art about propositions, but because text was seen as anti-aesthetic and a critique of traditional notions of beauty and aesthetic pleasure. This political perspective emphasized how aesthetic enjoyment was privileged in a world for most people, where for most people, language through administration, bureaucracy, and advertising shaped their daily experiences. Words played a significant role in conceptual art, often taking the form of propositions, textual statements, and expressions of thought, rather than manipulated material forms. In so doing, conceptual art, and she's also later in life, and finally she had a lifelong aspiration to visit Paris, like many of us, I'm sure, and she's there. So it's now that she's done that, what's next? Words played a significant role in conceptual art, often and expressions of thought. In so doing, conceptual art is understood as offering a critique of the object status of art, which was part of the tradition and legacy of a patriarchal system. Furthermore, the object status of art includes the commodity form, where objects are involved in the art buying and collecting system. Women artists who have historically faced underrepresentation and bias because of their gender have played a crucial role in shaping conceptual art and deeply influenced me. Their use of words by artists like Martha Rossler and Lisa Steele became a powerful form of resistance against mainstream art discourse, providing a fresh alternative language that challenged the usual unspoken rules of the art world. Additionally, women artists highlighted craft techniques often associated with women's work, such as quilting and sewing, as seen with artists like Joyce Whelan, Judy Chicago, and Senga Nangudi. Women's bodies also played a prominent role in their art, breaking new ground compared to their male counterparts, as demonstrated in the works of Gina Panay, Vali Explore, and Hannah Wilkie. When I first began in art, I recall attending several openings at the Women in Focus Gallery in Vancouver. At my first opening once, a woman came up to me and asked what I was doing at the opening, since I was the only man there. I was welcomed much more warmly when they saw that I was attending a second, a third, and a fourth opening at the same gallery. So conceptual art introduced me to the art world by providing a language and an entry point, but I often felt a profound disconnect that persists to this day. This feeling that's my mother's grave, by the way. This feeling dates to my first day of first grade at the age of 6. I had not attended kindergarten before and spoke very limited, in fact, no English. All those white faces watched me as I struggled to communicate in a language I didn't understand. And I realized early in life that the world is just as much about discourse as it is about material and physical aspects. That early memory as a boy taught me that whenever I read, I should do so with caution and a hint of skepticism, because hegemonic thought is everywhere, ready to catch me. Therefore, I approach each reading from the perspective of my upbringing. As I grow older, I increasingly see how my background shapes who I am today. When I first discovered art, I loved immersing myself in everything I could find about modern and contemporary art. I would spend hours in the Vancouver Art Gallery library, flipping through art magazines, picture books, any book on art, and I also pored over the works of artists and movements. My approach was never systematic or based on timelines or themes. Instead, it formed a kind of loose, interconnected web of knowledge, like a cloud of information. Yet, it made sense to me to work this way. I don't know precisely why I believe this, but it has only served me well. That's why I named my book of writings, Everything is Relevant. At this point in my stream of consciousness presentation, I feel compelled to share something about my personal life. I live in a suburb to the west of Philadelphia with my wife, Paloma, our son, Linus, and our daughter, Linnea. My son, Linus, and Linnea, it starts with L-I-N. My last name is Lum, but in Mandarin, which is more official, it's Lin. So my Chinese name in Mandarin is Lin, so Linus and Linnea has both my surname in their first names. And oh yes, I should also mention our Scottish Terrier, Maisie. As we haven't had a television since the late 1990s, we watch a lot of movies on our computer and listen to a lot of music. We subscribe to the Criterion channel and Mubi. We also have Amazon Prime, which we use to rent movies for occasional viewing. To watch a film, we will gather as a family in front of my Apple desktop. We were also fortunate to live within a 5-minute drive of the Bryn Mawr Film Institute, a great 5-screen theater dedicated to showing the best art films from around the world. They have an excellent historical film program and only show movies in their original format. For example, a few months ago, they recently screened 2001: A Space Odyssey in its original 70mm format. That's very rare because 70 mil projectors are really huge and expensive. I remember seeing the film when it first came out when I was just a little boy. And now here I was watching it in a theater with my son beside me. More recently, Linus has been discovering Rainer Werner Fassbinder. His favorite films of the German Wunderkind thus far are The Merchant of Four Seasons, The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant, and Martha. Like father, like son, or maybe it's more like son, like father, those would undoubtedly be among my favorite Fassbinder films. Sometimes before and certainly after, Linus will read reviews of the film he just watched, which compels me to read the same reviews. And we will discuss the movie we just saw at length around the dining room table. Next week in Philadelphia, I will introduce Dr. Nicolas Ballet, curator of media art at the Centre Pompidou in Paris, to a lecture he will give at Penn. He just wrote a book, more like a tome than a typical book, as it's nearly 800 pages. The book is titled Shock Factory, The Visual Culture of Industrial Music. It explores the visual aesthetics and artistic practices of the industrial music scene, especially in the 1970s and 1980s. It examines how artists used and subverted media, focusing on reprographic techniques such as photocopy art, mail art, album covers, and performance installations. It's not a topic I know well, even though I lived through the 1970s and 80s and attended a few concerts in New York at the famous punk and new wave venue CBGB's. But I am reading Ballet's book because I have to introduce him. I often spend days crafting my introduction for someone. My point is I read out of necessity or obligation. But I almost always find that obligations can be unexpected opportunities for learning. 2 weeks ago, I was an interlocutor in a public conversation with the renowned American poet and art essayist, John Yao. It was very special for me to meet John, as he is one of the few notable Chinese figures in art when I first started. As a young artist, I remember reading his book of essays, Please Wait by the Coat Room, Considering Race and Identity in American Art. The book, meeting him, reconnected me with my own past, symbolically closing a circle. I had read years ago Yao's essay on Wilfredo Lamb, and it left a deep impression on me. And now I look forward to the long overdue Wilfredo Lamb retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. In fact, I already have booked my hotel and purchased my Amtrak ticket for November 29 for the visit. So reading can be a hazardous affair, especially when working at a university. Too many colleagues write books or give me a book as a gift, and I always feel obliged to read them. And at Penn, just to get to associate professor, you have to have written 2 full books and started a third. Otherwise, you can't even get to associate. I fear the prospect of encountering the colleague after several months who gave me a book, and I have to admit that I have yet to get started on their book. That terrifies me. So this is a trait I developed thanks to my mother's influence, I think. Only last week, I was given a book on contemporary art by a close friend who was an art historian at Barnard College in New York. So now as I'm finishing Nicolas Ballet's book, I have to start soon on Alex Albero's book as well. Lastly, I want to share some advice with students about reading. I don't actually know whether there are that many students in this crowd, not the typecast. Oh, okay, good. So here's my advice, students. Reduce your social media usage. Cut back significantly on your TV watching. Limit your streaming service subscriptions. Walk more and develop a habit of noticing your surroundings. Design your environment for better clarity. I love connecting dots, and the world is full of dots to link across endless branches of knowledge and information. Read, but also set aside ample time to reflect on your life and consider how you can contribute meaningfully to the world. Observe people and their habits. Focus especially on those who are less advantaged. Think of the person waiting at the bus stop. Think of the late night office cleaner. Think of the food deliverer. Think of the sweatshop worker. Remember that we are all physically porous beings held together only by oscillating and ionized atoms and molecules. We are not solid, nor are we whole. When we breathe, atomic matter from us floats into the air and enters the body of another, and vice versa. We are never truly ourselves, but rather parts of others, and our molecules and atoms will persist long after we are gone. Remember, reflection enhances life. Don't feel pressured to demonstrate you're a reader. Read what you can, when you can, but read for enjoyment. Don't read for any other reason. The great American abstract expressionist artist Jackson Pollock was not a reader, but he was a great artist who deeply understood his era. Keep in mind there's a difference between being an intellectual and being truly intelligent. You don't need to be a bona fide intellectual to be undeniably brilliant. I mentioned earlier Foucault's idea of subject position. Here's another: subjugated knowledges that aren't acknowledged or recognized because they aren't scientific, data-driven, or proved through exegesis, but are instead passed down orally through time and often transmitted as myth. There are no strict rules for reading or specific path to gaining knowledge, but simply keep connecting more dots. As an undergraduate, I discovered Dostoevsky. I initially read Dostoevsky because it was required for an English class at Simon Fraser University. However, after finishing The Idiot, I realized how troubled I was at that time, grappling with internal conflicts of uncertainty and doubt about my own future. The key is to read based on how you feel about your life at a certain moment and in a specific context. Consider how what you read relates to your own self-awareness. Don't read to find definitive answers, but to deepen your understanding about life. That's why I especially admire Dostoevsky's short novel, Notes from Underground. I've always felt isolated and alienated in the world. And that's why I love Kenji Mizoguchi films, which offer no easy redemption, as Western films often do. In Mizoguchi movies, redemption only appears at the very end, after a life marked by cruelty, torment, and oppression. I relate to what Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben describes as perceiving the world not through its dominant light, but through its distant light. He suggests this reflects the disconnect between one's body and mind from their own time. Living as a modern person means feeling uneasy with linear chronological time, engaging with the fractures and disjunctions of the present. Essentially, living as a contemporary person involves actively engaging with one's historical context by looking beyond surface details to uncover hidden complexities, exclusions, and opportunities, and approaching it thoughtfully with the goal of affecting change. These are the reasons I read. Lastly, I want to share some of my current work with you. It relates to reading. It originates from a series I started in the mid-1980s called Language Paintings. Back then, I was interested in disrupting the language system of commercial shop signs. I actually worked as a sign painter as well. Now I focus more on pre- or post-alphabetic language. I believe this interest stems from my love for my autistic daughter, Linnea. She is nonverbal but communicates somewhat effectively with a talker or a specialized tablet that has voice pieces of words she can tap to form spoken sentences. Although she cannot talk, she is sensitive to the sounds around her. She reads her environment deeply. When it's very windy outside, she loves to stand in our backyard with her arms outstretched, embracing the weather with her eyes closed. To me, this is genuine reading. When I see my daughter in harmony with the world, that is the real and fundamental world, I think of Hubert Damisch's book, A Theory of Cloud. Damisch said that clouds give a sense of placelessness, acting as both the contrast and a substitute for place. Clouds displace formlessness and challenge and even defy perspective. They enable the creation of new pictorial spaces that are much more inclusive. This reflects the nature of reading, which often offers endless interpretive possibilities. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah. I speak 3 languages. I speak Cantonese. 我廣東人啊，識講普通話。Mais non, je parle français. Je suis né en France, quelques ans. Ouais. I can read French fluently.
Okay. I was just wondering whether reading in different languages gives you different images, different ways of approaching the text,
Of course.
Yeah.
Especially during the many interstices, that is the gaps between 2 languages.
Right.
Right? There are all kinds of implied meanings and that become less specific over another language. Right? And that's why it's imperative for kids to learn the second language. There's nothing more thrilling than being in Le Métro in Paris, and then I can hear 2 people speaking in French, and not that I'm eavesdropping, but you can hear it, right? So and sometimes I'll go, oh, can I help you?
Yeah. And I was also wondering, do you have any form of synesthesia with when you see text, when you see letters? Because your photographs paired with the short sentences, it just struck me that it's just such a miracle that strokes, and lines can just send up emotion and images to you.
Color.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned this example of my daughter,
Mm.
right? I mean, she's a total synesthetic, right? She feels everything at once.
Right.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi, and thank you. I really have loved watching the slides of your work while listening to you speak. And I've also appreciated the kind of roving relationship to reading that you describe, which seems to me very open. And you invite us to be open about reading as a practice, not driven, not judgy, not obsessive. But there is...
I can be a bit snobby if I'm in an airport.
Well, this is where my question goes.
But I can be a bit snobby if I'm in an airport and I see someone reading a big book of Danielle Steele. I'm going, why would you do that?
Maybe for the same reason they would read a Harlequin novella.
I don't think so. But anyway.
But my question was going to be, but still around the edges of your talk, there were values, sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit, about the status and the importance and the sort of proper disposition toward reading. And so I wondered if you could open up the what might be the sort of aside of the judgment or value of reading among maybe a hierarchy of other activities.
Well, first of all, I don't like putting things in a hierarchy, right? Reading is important to me. Going to a movie is important to me. Being with my Yeah. Yeah, because my sense is that students don't read enough. I think they should increase the amount of reading they do. And not just reading, I'm saying reading seriously, right? There's different degrees of reading. You could read endless Instagram posts. That may have a value, but I think at some point it's limited, right? Not that I really know since I'm not on social media, but I do think I know even from, well, not so much at Penn. Penn's a kind of unique situation because everyone there, all the kids at Penn, they're all blue-blooded kids who are children of basically the rulers of the universe, right? And they and they all speak like multiple languages, or you can bring up something about Japan, they'll go, oh yeah, we've been there, right? And so on. So that's a different situation. But I think a lot of kids don't know how to write. They don't know how to write cursive, for example, which shocking to me, right? My son, he has a hard time with that, right? And I think it's related to not reading enough or not reading the right. He reads a lot, right? My son, but because he has no choice, there's no TV. But I'm not entirely sure I'm answering your question. I just don't. I think people reading is something which is becoming increasingly a lost art, which I think is the case, but I don't know really. But that's just my perception, right? Even when I meet students, I'll mention certain books and they'll go, oh, no idea who that author is, right? It could be like Herman Melville, all right? It's not some obscure writer. I go, surely you know something about Moby Dick. Was that about a whale, And I go, maybe you should read the book. It's a great read. So, yeah.
Am I right in assuming you own a lot of books or have accumulated a lot? And is
Yeah.
there a way you organize them differently? And where would you keep them all?
Well, I do have a lot of books. I have about 3 large rooms full of books, right, from floor to ceiling. And then we kind of renovated the house. And so we had probably like, I'm not sure, well over 150, whatever, boxes full of books. And then everything became disorganized, right? Whereas before it was all organized, right? It was just, that wasn't my doing. It was like I had some students help me, and they just put it in. And now I kind of remember where all the books are now. So it's totally disorganized. It's not chronological. It's kind of like it's kind of heterotopic, actually. It's like the Foucauldian idea of heterotopia in the sense that you have different synchronic arrangements of books from different eras on different topics, different histories, and they're all existing side by side.
Do you also collect multiple copies of the same book if you like that book more?
If I can't find, I have multiple copies only because I may have a memory and I go, oh, I need to, that was in this book and I can't find it because it's so disorganized. And then I end up buying a second copy. So I have a lot of second copies for that reason, not for any better reason.
We have a question here. I've been trying to think of how to ask this question so it's not a yes, no, and I don't know if I'm going to succeed. But I was really fascinated by the comments you made about reading as a relationship with the text that changes over time. So rereading, reinterpretation, and revisiting works. And I'm wondering how that same experience may apply to art in your life, revisiting works of art, and how your response or reaction or interpretation of them may change.
Yeah, well, I mean, I stopped making language paintings in around 89, maybe 1990. And then I restarted these only last year, right? Because I had, I don't mind saying, I was quite ill and had major surgery in my torso. So I have like really nice, huge scars in my stomach now. And so, and it was a bit slow, the convalescence. And so my dear wife said, well, you surely, I mean, you need to make some art or something. You can't just walk slowly like an old guy, which I am anyway. So around the house. And so I started making these paintings, right? Because I at least I could paint 2 or 3 hours each day, and without moving too much, right? So yeah, it's like and it's my shtick, I guess. One thing I think life is always about learning anew things that you always knew about yourself in a certain way as well. It's impossible to totally know yourself. On the other hand, you do know certain things about yourself in a more deep way. And I was always interested in certain things. I always had this view of things. Not that I'm not wrong often. I just mean that on certain fundamental views about the world, that especially things I care about, I've always cared about. And I can see it even in my mother, who I was very close to. So, it's like who's it? Freud that said that, biology is destiny. There's some of that, right? So yeah, that's the best way I can answer that. Are you the director of the museum?
Yes, hello, Ken. Nice to see you.
Okay.
My question is about, thank you for your talk today and the insights that you've shared. 2 parts. What is your relationship to libraries? Do you spend a lot of time in the library? Secondly, I'm just wondering, in relation to the library, how do you think that, given the way libraries, community libraries and other libraries are evolving as social spaces and taking on all of these different roles as community hubs with maker spaces and different kinds of services, how do you think that's opening up or not relationships to reading?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm very old-fashioned. I like books, right? And also, when I write essays, I start with the pen in hand, and then I transfer. But I don't think anyone does that anymore. I wrote both screenplays by typing out everything and then having a whiteboard with about 100 Post-it notes where I'd move them to make sure there was continuity. And then someone told me, "What software did you use? Very unusual format." I said, "What are you talking about?" Right? So that's how anachronistic I am. But I do think, well, I think it's good if libraries keep up with the times, right? Whatever form. So it's good that they can draw in people. But I also think that, and it's a hard one to answer because everyone has a different relationship to libraries, and why shouldn't libraries also reinvent themselves, right? It made me think of Jacques Derrida's book, The Spectres of Marx. I don't know if anyone's read that. It's a book from, I guess it was from 93 or 94. And he came up with this term, which I find really important, which was hauntology, that, the ghosts of, and he applied it to technology too, like the reinvention of institutions. He applied that we were always haunted by the earlier familiar forms that meant more to us. And so for me, a library with books is really important. I love spending time in libraries with books. That doesn't mean I don't spend a lot of time on my cell phone reading apps. I do that every morning. But I do think my sense, again, I'm not sure it's true, is that too many libraries are almost at the point of ingratiating themselves to the current demands. And a lot of that doesn't really have to do with reading. And so I worry about that. Is that too old school?
My first question is just a yes or no. Are you familiar with Book Talk?
No.
Okay. So, Book Talk is a side of TikTok that's a lot about maybe not the most literary books, but they've become very, very popular. And if you go into a lot of libraries or especially bookstores, they have tables of Book Talk books, generally kind of romance and stuff like that. And I've seen a big resurgence in young people reading, but they tend to read a lot of these things that maybe the people here wouldn't read.
You're
And I'm wondering,
You're typecasting.
I'm typecasting. And I'm just wondering what you think of like the developing reading taste, if you think that, like, in your experience as you were younger, were you reading more mainstream, less literary, and now you've changed your relationship with reading? Do you think reading is just generally doomed for the younger generation with their short attention spans? How do you see reading changing?
Well, I think it's important for young people, even if they're reading the same book through advised, what's it called, book talk, then, and that's good. But I would hope at some point they don't read because my friends are reading that, and that they start discovering the whole world of reading on an individual level, because that book was important to me, or that book is something I need to know, or that they walk into a bookstore. I like that. There's a resurgence of bookstores, and they, like, for example, I walked by a bookstore the other day. I was outside and I saw, Captives of Capture, Aaron Woodruff. It was about the first native people that became enslaved by the early conquistadors, right? And I read that book recently, actually. It's horrifying, right? But I just was walking and I went, oh, that looks kind of interesting. I was waiting for someone and so I went in and I got it. So there's lots of opportunities to discover books, right? And so that's my only hope. For young people, that they can move towards individual curating based on the idea that would help me grow, right? Grow as a deeper person.